Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Basic Bible Study, or Bible Study Basics, whatever you want to call it. Please say hi to each other in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. Oh, I see Dick and Nardine have already said hi. Hello. Once again, folks, we are doing one Bible story a week, going straight through the Bible, all of the critical Bible stories. And I recommend you read them in advance. If you'd like to get the paraphrasing that I'm writing and that I'm using, shoot me an email right there. And also use that email to send me any questions that you may have about the story that we're talking about this week. If you like to ask your questions quietly when no one's looking, that's the best way to do it. But if you don't mind asking the questions publicly, by all means, just go ahead and put them there in the chat. So we're going to do the story in just a minute. It's going to be Joseph's very tense family reunion when his brothers find him in Egypt. After that, we're going to talk about some Christian current events, some current events going on in the church and the world around us today. All right, let's go ahead and begin then with a word of prayer, shall we? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are our rock and our redeemer. Amen. By the way, we did finally have the internet service at the church upgraded, so hopefully you've got improved quality video tonight. I also turned up the gain on the microphone a little bit, so hopefully I sound good as well. If you have any technical problems with any of it, please let me know. Hello, John. Good to have you here tonight. All right, so we are at Genesis chapter 42. When last we left off, Joseph was in Egypt and he had just talked to Pharaoh to interpret Pharaoh's dream, and Pharaoh's response was to put Joseph in charge of land management in Egypt. Now we're going to take a skip. We're not a time skip, but a location jump. We're going to go back to Canaan, where the rest of Joseph's family is still hanging out and living. And his father Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you sitting around staring at each other? I've heard," oh, I should say, by the way, the famine has begun. The famine that was predicted last week has begun. So, I'm sorry. Here we go. Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you sitting around staring at each other? I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Go buy some before we all starve to death." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob wouldn't let Benjamin go because he was afraid something might happen to him. The famine spread all the way across Canaan, so people came to Egypt from all over. Israel's sons were part of the crowd. Joseph was governing the land, and he was in charge of grain sales. His brothers came and bowed down before him. Joseph recognized them, but acted as if they were strangers to him. He asked, "Where did you come from?" They said, "Canaan, we came to buy food." Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him, but he remembered all the dreams he'd had about them. He said, "You're spies. You've come to find our weaknesses." They said, "We just came to buy food. We're honest men. We're not spies." He said, "No, you're here to spy on us." They said, "We're all brothers. There were 12 of us, but one is dead and the other is with our father back in Canaan." Joseph said, "If you're not spies, prove it. I swear on Pharaoh's life that none of you will leave here until I meet your brother." Then he had them locked up for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "Look, I'm a God-fearing man, so I'll give you a chance. I'll only keep one of you here, and I'll let the rest of you go home with grain. If you're telling the truth, bring your other brother back here and prove it. If you do that, I'll let you all live." They agreed. Then they muttered among themselves, "This is our payback for what we did to Joseph. We ignored his cries for mercy when we put him in danger, and now we're in danger. We deserve this." Reuben said, "I told you not to do it, but you wouldn't listen. Now his blood is on our hands, and we're all paying for it." They didn't realize that Joseph understood everything they said. He'd been using an interpreter as if he couldn't speak their language. As he listened, he got so upset that he had to step out and compose himself. When he came back, he took Simeon into custody. Then he had their bags filled with grain and provisions. He also had their money put back in their bags with the grain. Then they loaded up their donkeys and set out. When they camped for the night, one of them found his money. He said, "They didn't keep my payment. It's all right here." This scared them, and they said, "What is God doing to us?" When they got home, they told Jacob everything that had happened to them. As they unpacked their bags, they realized that all of them still had their money. They were now terrified, and Jacob said, "First Joseph died, then you lost Simeon, now you want to take Benjamin away? I can't believe this is happening to me." Reuben said to Jacob, "If I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill my sons. Trust me, and I will bring him back." He said, "No way. He's the only real son I have left. If anything happens to him, it'll kill me." And that's the end of our story for this week. I could have gone straight into the next one, but I thought that was enough. So, what do we have to say about this story tonight? The story of this is interesting to me anyway. The story of Joseph reuniting with his brothers might be the world's oldest surviving example of suspenseful literature. Because when you read the story for the first time, and unfortunately, many of us know the story well from childhood, so we know how it ends before we read it, and we don't feel the suspense. But when you read the story for the first time, if you don't know how it's going to end, it puts you on the edge of your seat a little bit. Is Joseph going to make peace with his brothers, or is he going to give them what they deserve? The reader doesn't know. In fact, Joseph might not know as we go through the story as well what he's going to do. And you got to ask, what is Joseph doing here? I mean, he's definitely playing around with his brothers. He's screwing with them somehow, and it's hard to really know what his ultimate goal is. Is he trying to find out whether or not his brothers regret what they did? Is he trying to find out if they have changed? So is it a test of some sort? Or is this just his way of getting back at them? He keeps this deceit up with them for a long time, but he does not seem to be enjoying it. So why is he doing it? What is it? What is he up to? Now, most of these questions, not all of them, but most of them, we're never going to know the answer to. But it is fun to speculate, and we will speculate when the time comes. In the meantime, let's make a few observations about this story. Oh, and by the way, hello, Charles. I did see you say hi in there while I was reading. Joseph has changed so much that his brothers don't recognize him. Now, if Joseph was just a little boy the last time they saw him, that could explain it to a degree because, when you go from being a boy to being a man, the shape of your face changes, your physique changes. You can look really different. Not everybody changes dramatically during adolescence, but some people do. Hello, we got Rob, Tony, and Gene here. Good to have you with us, folks. So it might be that he's just changed physically that much, but more likely than not, there's a lot more going on than that because Joseph is now living as an Egyptian. One of the peculiarities of the ancient Israelites is that they let their beards grow long and they let their hair grow long after most other cultures had stopped doing that, particularly during the during bad times. And famine is a bad time. That's when one of the times when violence is likely to take place. And the reason was because if violence does break out, long hair and beards is a liability because people can grab hold of that. So most cultures had started cutting, the men had started cutting their hair shorter. The Egyptians were famous for taking that to an extreme in that most Egyptian men shaved their entire body here on Franklin Street. I don't know if you heard that or not, but we've got some emergency vehicles going by. Anyway, so the Egyptians were famous for taking taking personal grooming in the all the way in the other extreme, in that they the men would shave their entire bodies, head to toe, every 3 days. Most of them had no hair at all. Now we see the pictures of the pharaohs and their sarcophaguses and everything with those braided goatees. Very often those were fake though; those were stuck on them after they died. They were purely ornamental. I don't know if they had ornamental beards in life or not, but anyway, so even if Joseph had been a full-grown man the last time I saw him, if he's totally shaved, not to mention the fact that Egyptian men generally wore eye makeup everywhere. So if they're used to a long-haired bearded guy, and now they're seeing, or a long-haired boy, and now they're seeing a grown man who's totally shaved and wears eye makeup, it's a good chance they're not going to recognize him anyway, just because of the cultural differences. Because Joseph seems to be functioning. Here goes another one. Hang on. Real YouTubers have sound insulation. I'm just a simple country preacher here in Hagerstown. Anyway, Joseph seems to be culturally Egyptian now. So I'm sure it looks quite different. Now, the risk of beating a dead horse, I'm going to have to say this one more time. Jacob is a terrible, terrible father. Because in this story, he makes it explicitly clear that only Rachel's sons count. So I put in my paraphrasing, he's the only real son I've got left. What he literally says is, he's the only one. He's my only son. He says this to his 10 other sons. I've only got one son left, he says to his 10 sons. Wow. Unbelievable. And on top of that, he is just spectacularly self-centered because, all right, so one of his sons is dead. One of his sons is trapped in Egypt. They're offering, they want to take another one back with them. And what does he say? I can't believe this is all happening to me. Joseph had a pretty bad day too. Simeon had a pretty bad day. Benjamin might have a really bad day, but no, they're not having a bad day. Dad's having a bad day. Doesn't matter what's going on with the kids. Unbelievable. At least, he doesn't say anything in the story to reassure or redirect his kids in any way. It's all just, woe is me. And then, of course, Reuben is willing to offer his own children as collateral while he's gone. He says, let us take Benjamin back to Egypt with us to prove to this guy that we were telling the truth. And if I don't bring them back safe and sound, you can kill my boys, your grandkids. You can kill them. That tells us everything we need to know about this family. Oh, it's just spectacular. I will say that the boys do seem to have one redeeming quality, and that is that they feel guilty. They feel guilt over the sins that they've committed over the years. And that is a step in the right direction, we have to admit. But the question is, will this guilt motivate them to make better decisions in the future? Will it motivate them to change? And different people come down, no, they don't. We all agree. No, the guilt does not seem to make, with the possible exception of Reuben, the guilt does not seem to make them better people. Of course, that's, the story was preserved, not because they changed. Clearly they didn't. The story was preserved to motivate us to make better decisions so that we will not make decisions that cause our families to be, not just to cause our families to be dysfunctional, but then to pass that dysfunction down to the next generation. This all goes back. All this goes back to Rebecca and Jacob and Esau. All right. What does this story tell us about God? God does not make an appearance in this story, but God is present behind the scenes in this story. It is no coincidence that Joseph has been reunited with his brothers. Remember, God told Joseph in a dream that his brothers would one day bow down before him. In fact, it was that dream, sharing that dream, that started the ball rolling and all these things that have happened. And now that dream has finally come true. There are his brothers bowing down before him. They don't know that it's him, but nonetheless, they are bowing down before him. Now, it may not be clear how God has guided this series of events. Of course, is it ever clear how God has guided a series of events? But nonetheless, we find meaning in them and see God's hand at work in them after the fact. It is clear that some sort of a plan is in motion here. Now, what does this story tell us about ourselves? That question would be a lot easier to answer if we knew Joseph's motives. If we knew Joseph's motives and what he was thinking and what he was feeling, it'd be a lot easier for us to identify with what he's thinking and feeling, but we don't. So we're just sitting here asking. We don't know why he engages in all of this deception. But maybe that's the point, because just as we don't understand what Joseph's doing, it is entirely possible that Joseph doesn't understand why he's doing what he's doing either. Um, Hopefully, we can all relate to that feeling. If we can't relate to that feeling, if we feel that we always understand our motives and why we do what we do, then either we've already achieved Christian perfection and 100% enlightenment, or we're not being introspective enough, because most of us do things from time to time that are kind of hard to explain why we do what we do. Um, Now, we may not all keep secrets as big as the one that Joseph keeps, but we all keep our secrets. And are we really keeping them for the greater good? Is Joseph keeping his secret for the greater good, or is he keeping it for his own good? All right, what does this story tell us about our relationships with God and with each other? You know, the old proverb, it's not a biblical proverb, it's a folk proverb, certainly biblically based. Honesty is the best policy, right? Well, we've all heard that maxim. When I was young, I was blessed to have good teachers, both in church and in my family, who elaborated on that maxim, and their words have stuck with me through the years. I remember my Sunday school teacher, Brother Jay Johnson. He has called him Brother Jay. Um, he said to us that lies have a tendency to snowball, because the longer you hide a lie, the longer you hold on to a lie, the more elaborate your stories have to be to maintain it. And after a while, and they'll just keep getting more elaborate until they come crashing down. And the longer you wait to come clean, the worse it's ever going to be. And this is absolutely true. I remember a guy I used to know who worked in military intelligence said the number one reason to disbelieve conspiracy theories is every conspiracy theory depends on people being able to keep. Every conspiracy theory depends on thousands of people being able to, one, keep a secret, and two, lie consistently. And the fact is, very few people can actually do that. Every attempt at a conspiracy comes out sooner or later, because lies are inherently unstable. And that leads me to what my dad said to me once. And he doesn't remember saying it. He just said it off the cuff, but to me, it was profound. So it stuck with me. He said, the nice thing about telling the truth is that no matter how stupid you are, the truth will always make sense. Whereas most people are not able to lie. Most people are not smart enough to lie convincingly and consistently. Joseph's brothers have been keeping a secret for years too, right? So Joseph is hiding the fact that he is in fact Joseph, going by an Egyptian name. And his brothers are hiding the fact that they sold him, and they're not sure what happened to him after they sold him. He may or may not still be alive. They've told the father that they knew that, they led the father to believe he was dead. So the lies are getting more elaborate and harder to maintain, and things are just going to get worse until somebody pulls the pin and the truth comes out. That's our story for this week. So let's talk about the news. And first, let's talk about the good news. And I wanted to get this out because there was some stuff in the news today that made me wonder what the bigger story was. You may have seen in the news today that the judge that is handling the Boy Scouts of America bankruptcy case and the negotiations with all of the religious groups and the victims and the insurance carriers rejected the portion of the deal that the LDS Church had put together. And the article I read said the LDS Church and other religious entities. And I thought, wait a minute, are we one of those? Did our agreement not go through? The good news is that it does not affect us. Our portion of the bankruptcy case was approved by the judge. So we shouldn't need to be worried about what is going on with that right now. So there's a couple things that the BSA needs to take care of for it to go through, and a couple of things that the Church of Latter-day Saints needs to take care of. It looks like, given enough time, this is finally going to go through. So now let's go on to the bad news. This is one of those nice ones. You don't want with 2 sources of caffeine. So Diet Coke is gone. Now we switch to Bigelow tea. All right. So I have always been critical of the independent church movement. I'm a Methodist for many reasons, but one of the reasons I'm United Methodist is that having spent time in an independent evangelical church during my formative years, I saw that there was not enough accountability in that system, especially in congregations where the founding pastor is the current pastor and has had a long tenure in that congregation. There's almost always a problem with accountability in those situations. And yes, I actively sought accountability. I think Christians should actively seek accountability. But the independent church movement has as a creed that the individual congregation is the only form of church government that they approve of. That any hierarchy above that they believe is not biblical. So there is no denominational structure looking over and providing accountability to independent churches. And in recent years, as some independent churches have become mega churches, lots of money is involved and lots of influence is involved. And the lack of accountability in those situations has led to some spectacular, what do you want to call it, church implosions, some spectacularly bad actions by some pastors in these churches. And, so we had Mark Driscoll out on the West Coast at Mars Hill Church. We have Bill Hybels in Chicago, the Chicago area with Willow Creek. We had multiple things go on in Hillsong Church, both in Australia and in New York, and some other lesser problems elsewhere. Just unbelievably bad problems revealing huge character flaws, if not mental instability in some of these pastors. And when that happens, it affects all of us, okay? Now, I want to say that there are independent churches that are run very ethically. They're run ethically because they're led by ethical pastors. If in that type of a structure, if the pastor does not want an ethical structure, there's nothing there's nothing to ensure that it will happen. I hope that made sense. Okay, so the independent churches that are ethically run because ethical pastors put accountability structures in place, or they were just so ethical they didn't need them. But the only person who can put those in place in those congregations pretty much is the pastor. The pastor can prevent lay people from putting accountability in place in an independent church, especially if the founding pastor is still the pastor. Now, there have been some bright shining lights, and there have certainly been some movements to try to bring accountability to the overall movement, but because the nature of the movement, participation in these programs has always been voluntary. So the most spectacularly bad case in recent years was probably Carl Lentz up at Hillside, but before that it was Mark Driscoll at Mars Hill Church out in Seattle. And Mark Driscoll, there are numerous reasons to be concerned about Mark Driscoll, not the least of which is that he's a raging misogynist. Um, and I don't need to account the reasons why. They're well reported in the media. But he did something spectacularly unethical. He wrote a series of books, and the last book that he wrote made it onto. He might have written more since, but the last one he wrote while he was pastor of Mars Hill made it onto the New York Times bestseller list. And it came out that the reason it made it onto that list was that he used church funds to buy thousands of copies on it of his own book to propel it onto the bestseller list. When that came out, that's breaking the rules. New York Times removed the book from the list; it lost its ranking. But the people in the church wanted to know. Wait a minute, you spent how many thousands of? I mean, hardback book cost $20, and they bought thousands of copies. This is tens of thousands of dollars that I think they spent like $40,000 buying books or so. Don't quote me on that. It was tens of thousands of dollars they spent buying these books with church funds just to get their pastor's book onto the bestseller list. And when it came out, there was a big fight in the church, and not only was he ousted, but the church actually dissolved. They felt that they lost so much credibility that they couldn't go on. Well, Mark Driscoll didn't go away. He now pastors another church. And one of his biggest defenders is Andy Wood. Andy Wood has been the pastor at Echo Church. And at a recent event that Andy Wood hosted, he had Mark Driscoll as a guest speaker. And, at the time when Mark was having all his problems, he said all the penitent things, that he was going to work on himself and he was going to grow. And he was sorry. And he said everything he thought he needed to say to save his job. But now he's backtracked on all of that. He says that what happened to him at Mars Hill was that there was a conflict on the board and he was forced out. Whereas at the time, the board said that he was being kicked out because he was a bully and because he had done numerous things that were incompatible with a Christian lifestyle. Okay. Now he says he's the victim of a takeover, basically at the church, and he says he has doubled down. He said that a church's governance structure should be designed for the purpose of protecting the pastor's power in that congregation. And he has gone so far to say that if a pastor is going to be held accountable, it will not be by the congregation or by a board of directors at the congregation. It certainly isn't going to be by a denomination because they don't have those. He says that if anybody's going to hold a pastor accountable, it's going to be pastors of larger churches. So I guess if you're the pastor of the largest church, then you don't have anybody holding you. And what type of a structure or accountability would that be? So Andy Wood, was very excited about all of this. And the problem is Andy Wood has just been selected to be the next pastor of Saddleback Church. Saddleback Church has been one of the bright, shining examples of a well-run independent church. Now, it's technically Southern Baptist, but Southern Baptist churches are voluntary members of that association. They don't have to stay in it if they don't want to. The denomination is very limited. They don't even call themselves a denomination. They're an association of churches. The authority they have over their congregations is quite limited. And Rick Warren, the guy who wrote Purpose Driven Life, a great person, who has built a great church out there. He's retiring, and they have selected Andy Wood to be his replacement, and that just breaks my heart because that sends the whole movement in the wrong direction. And whenever any of these guys flames out like that, it affects not just all of us pastors because we lose credibility. It affects the people in the pews because people look at us and people look at you, I should say you, and say, why are you guys still part of an organization that has all these crazy problems that would never be tolerated in the business world? Why are your standards lower in the church than they would be in the business world? And that's a fair question. So this cult of personality surrounding megachurch pastors Is it cancer? I shouldn't just say megachurch. Any size congregation where the pastor has a cult built up around them, personality cult. It's cancer. We need to excise it from among us. So that's all I have for you folks this week. Once again, if you have any questions, do not forget to ask. Either send them to me in an email, or you can if you see me personally, you can always ask me then. You can always put them in the comments. And don't forget, people keep forgetting this. If you miss the video when it's live, you can watch it anytime you want to. You can catch up on it on Facebook. It might be easier to find it on the YouTube channel. Either way, you can watch it and you can put questions on there. Rob always watches. Rob and Tony and Gene always watch on YouTube. Most people watch it on Facebook. But anyway, so don't forget you can catch up. And if you talk to other people that missed it, tell them they can catch up too. All right? So let us go ahead and close with my favorite prayer, shall we? God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that. All right, folks. Hope to see you all soon. Take care of each other, and God bless.